The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Hello, you are listening to and quite possibly watching the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. My name is Josh Edison. I'm seated. I was going to say located, and then I was going to say sitting, and then they got all
And then you decided to go, you're seated.
I am seated.
You are situated.
I'm situated
in Auckland, New Zealand, whilst I am situated in Bucharest, Romania. I'm taking control of this podcast, Joshua. You've already fouled up the introduction. So welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. Normally at this particular point in time, we'd make some comment about the weather. It's raining back in Auckland. It's a lovely spring day here in Bucharest. Is there anything else we need to say?
Probably not really, no. We could make some...
See, I've just completely depowered you, haven't I? You're just a shell of your former self. You no longer have any authority over this podcast. You're going, anything else to say? I could talk about the sports ball. Yes, the sports ball. It's been very sporty this year. It's been a game of two halves. The better half won. That half was my wife. Zing! We should move on to the news.
Do you mean to imply that I ever had some sort of authority over this podcast? Because if I had, I would have abused it. I'd have abused it horribly. I feel like I've missed a trick now.
I just feel that I needed to give you some kind of purpose or meaning to your otherwise flat and uninteresting life.
Well, and that you failed, so I guess we should go to the news.
Indeed. Straight to the news.
Breaking conspiracy theories in the news.
So we return again to the Sergei and Yulia Skripal story. Both Skripals are now said to be conscious and talking, which has led to a new theory making the rounds: food poisoning.
Yes, certain sites are claiming that the only reasonable interpretation of the evidence is that the Skripals were not poisoned by Novichok nerve poison, but rather ate bad seafood. This version of the story either claims the UK government jumped at the wrong hypothesis because of pre-existing Russian fears, or that the British government deliberately blamed Russia, an actual false flag.
Now, the story hasn't got much traction, in part because the people peddling it are simply saying, well, they recovered, which is rare for nerve poisoning, so it must have been something else. That would be interesting if it were medical professionals making that claim, but it's mostly people who are already sceptical of the whole Russia angle.
Which brings us to the diplomatic stoush. You see, Russia wants in on the investigation and is getting very annoyed with the UK for not being allowed to help find out who really poisoned Sergei and Yulia.
Which is interesting. Typically, you do not let suspects help you investigate a crime. Oh, well, you don't, outside of a standard whodunit plot. But this seems to be Russia's angle. Let us help you find out who the real poisoners are.
It all comes across like the plot of a Cold War thriller, which is frankly quite scary, given just how close we came to World War several times during the Cold War, and the fact that a new Cold War would drastically increase the number of cover-ups and conspiracies. After all, when you are at war with an enemy who can strike anywhere and whose agents are hidden in your midst, secrecy becomes the byword of political action, and that's no good to anyone.
Talking of no good to anyone, more on that hit-and-run story.
Which is to say, more on Operation Burnham and the curious case of the Defence Force chief who fled in the night.
Yes, now we've covered the follow-up to our original story about the New Zealand Defence Force and the sticky case of Operation Burnham, which is an SAS operation in Afghanistan in which journalists Nikki Hager and John Stevenson alleged civilians were killed. Now we have two curious updates.
The first is that Defence Force Chief Tim Keating has stepped down a week before an official inquiry into the matter was announced. Some are speculating he has stepped down voluntarily before he would have been asked to step down as a result of the inquiry. Although should the inquiry find the Defence Force culpable for civilian deaths, it is not at all clear his stepping down will be seen as anything other than trying to avoid getting the blame.
And the other interesting tidbit has been the Defence Force refusing to release the rule of engagement for Operation Burnham because the information has not been declassified by the state that issued them.
Yes, Aotearoa's defence force in Afghanistan is, or at least was, operating under an ROE issued presumably by the United States, and we, the public of Aotearoa, who the defence force serve, cannot be told what the rules of engagement are, which is just a little conspiratorial, in that what better way to hide shady dealings than to work with someone else's legal framework?
We will, of course, update you on the Operation Burnham story as news develops.
But now, vampires and vampire capitalism, because the New Zealand Defence Force, the NZDF, is paying vampires for realsies.
Yes, vampire capitalist and actual vampire Peter Thiel.
Actual vampire in that he believes that injecting the blood of the young into his own bloodstream has regenerative properties.
Turns out to have been doing work for the NZDF. Well, his Lord of the Rings named surveillance company Palantir has been.
Yes, the NZDF has been spending up to 1.2 million New Zealand dollars per year on services with Palantir to analyse data. Now, what data we don't know, but given that Palantir is linked to Cambridge Analytica, people are suspecting the worst and that the NZDF might be analysing data about New Zealand citizens, which is a definite no-no. To add fire to that suspicion, the NZDF took a year to admit to using Palantir, claiming acknowledging or denying connections to the company would endanger the national interest, something the Official Information Ombudsman has rejected.
Little old Aotearoa getting more and more conspiratorial by the day. Anything else?
Well, just a little note about right-wing parties and the suspicion they run down essential services to then justify privatising them. You see, it's just about budget time back home in Aotearoa, where the government of the day outlined its spending for the next financial year, and the new government, Labour, is arguing that the last government, National, left the economic books in a much more dire state than anyone expected.
Over the last few weeks, we've had stories about one of our hospitals being filled with black mould, lack of money set aside for essential surgeries and the like, which the current government is claiming were issues the previous national government knew about but ignored in order to justify tax cuts.
Now, a long-standing theory on the left has been that right-wing governments run down essential services in order to justify privatising them. The argument being the public will think it's not a consequence of deliberate mismanagement, but rather that public ownership simply doesn't work out financially.
Now, neither the good doctor nor myself are economists, and we have well-known left leanings.
Our doctors recommend orthotics to fix that, but what would they know?
Yes. Anyway, we're obviously more than a little partial to the idea that reducing welfare spending in order to deliver tax cuts is not actually a shining example of economic management, but it is interesting to note that the former government's Minister of Health, Jonathan Coleman, is leaving Parliament to run a private healthcare company, and that the Leader of the Opposition, Simon Bridges, thinks the new government should seek private capital to shore up the health system.
Whilst this is not evidence which directly proves the left's conspiracy theory about the right, it certainly seems just a little suggestive.
Well, that must exhaust the home country's recent conspiratorial pool, surely.
No.
No?
Well, there's the Ministry of Primary Industries cover-up.
Oh well, do tell.
So, under the previous government, an animal tracking program, NAIT, was implemented, which was meant to deliver a report in March of last year. Except it didn't, and it took the new Minister of Agriculture, Damien O'Connor, demanding its release to get it out.
So why the delay of around a year?
Well, because delaying the NIT port meant that officials did not have to admit that they failed to stop the spread of Mycoplasma bovis disease, which might have meant the country would not now have to slaughter 22,000 cows.
So they were covering up their own mistakes?
Basically, it turns out the report that should have been released a year ago recommended the NIT NAIT, I keep saying that incorrectly, the NAIT, I'm really just bad with acronyms, be overhauled. But officials delayed the release of the port in order to avoid blame for inadequate systems.
Leading to widespread Mycoplasma bovis disease and now mass slaughter. As a vegan who opposes dairy farming, how do you feel about this?
Well, to be true, conflicted. I both want less cows and less corruption in the country, but it seems I can't have one without the other.
And talking about being confused, let's talk about the storm and how Donald Trump is working with, not against, Robert Mueller. And we're back to talk about the storm, not, I should point out, the storm that lashed Auckland a couple of days ago and knocked over lots of trees and cut a whole lot of power. But the storm with capital letters. Not the
the oncoming storm.
What was the one in England was the beast, wasn't it? But that was an actual storm, not a beast at all.
Yes, and actually this is where metaphors get very confusing, because the beast was an actual storm. The oncoming storm we're talking about is a metaphorical storm and not a literal storm, unless Donald Trump was talking about a literal storm, at which point he has predicative weather powers that have hitherto been unseen in American presidents. Although I'm sure someone's going to write in and say, turns out that actually Gerald Ford was actually very good at predicting storms, as was Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson.
But anyway, the storm, capital letters, has sort of become the name for a conspiracy theory that's been doing the rounds in the pro-Trump crowd. It's been described as the successor to Pizzagate. Pizzagate, which you remember was the claims that the Democrats were running a pedophile ring out of the basement of a pizza shop that didn't have a basement.
Largely due to weird emails about Pistas. It's a special food stuff. It's a combination of pizza and pasta, la pizza. I learned about that last year when I was in Bucharest flatting with an Italian who also invented the pita pizza, but that horrific invention should not be talked about in public. But yes, so the protesters were sending very interesting emails about pizzas, which certain people who belong to the Pizzagate conspiracy theory took to be coded references to pedophilia, because as we know, Democrats are pedophiles, or at least that's the common wisdom amongst certain people on Reddit.
Did it even was it even serious? I thought it had kind of started as more of a joke on Reddit. I'm saying, what when they talk about CP, what if instead of being cheese pizza, it's actually child pornography, and then people took it seriously? Or was it a little bit serious?
It's one of those things where it's possible it started out as a joke. It's very easy to then go back and say, oh, no, we were just joking the entire time. We never meant for people to take this seriously. But whether or not it started as a joke, it did end with people with guns going into a pizzeria demanding to see the back room where the child pornography was produced.
Now, nothing like that has happened regarding the storm conspiracy theory yet, but it is an awful lot bigger and more wide-ranging. Now, it refers to, I believe it's called the storm because there was that time when Trump was talking to a bunch of army people, was it, and talked about this being the calm before the storm.
No, but not just that. He was having a meeting with a bunch of army people and then summoned the press to the room, gestured around and said, look, this is the stuff before the storm. What storm would that be? At which point he didn't make any more details, and journalists were going, we're not entirely sure what happened there. We just appear to have been invited into a room so that we can see Trump prowling around with military chiefs and talking about an oncoming storm. Is he talking about a military invasion? But no, the good people are...
Do we know?
Oh, yes, he may well be making reference to the classic serial Remembrance of the Dalek, in which Sylvester McCoy, the Seventh Doctor, is revealed to be referred to as the oncoming storm by the Daleks. Now, it is possible that Donald Trump is a Doctor Who fan, and Doctor Who fans around the world would be rather horrified by that notion, although it does mean I do want to know Donald Trump's view on Stephen Moffat's tenure as showrunner of Doctor Who. I think that would be a very fascinating conversation to have with the President of the United States of America. I'm also fairly sure that Barack Obama will turn out to be a Doctor Who fan. He seems like the kind of person who would enjoy Doctor Who. Yeah.
Anyway, this particular conspiracy theory does not involve Doctor Who yet. But the guts of it is that the whole Trump, Russia, collusion, Mueller investigating thing is all some sort of massively complicated and cunning double, triple, quadruple bluff where Trump is playing that whole 11th dimensional chess thing, and everything is actually working out exactly as he wants because he's really working to expose collusion with Russia, and he's making it look like he's been colluding with Russia and that he's being investigated for this collusion, when in fact he's really it's all just a trick to root out the people who are really colluding with Russia, and to get the real bad guys, who of course will turn out to be all the Democrats and Obama and Hillary and John McCain and Podesta and probably Nancy Pelosi as well, and so on and so on and so on forever.
Yes, a lot of Democrats are apparently going to be shipped off to a massively expanded Guantanamo Bay prison, and peace and prosperity will follow thereafter.
So it's been described as sort of a sting operation. I'll admit I had a little bit of trouble following it. Could be because my comprehension skills aren't quite up to it. Could be because it's an incoherent mess. We'll let the ages decide. But they seem to be along the lines of Trump wants all these evil colluders and collaborators, who are also obviously pedophiles and slave traders and responsible for all of the evils in the world everywhere, and also the deep state. Unless Trump is the deep state, that's a little bit uncertain there. He wants them all investigated and have their crimes brought out, but he knows that they'd never allow that properly. So what he does is he pretends to be colluding with Russia to kick off this big investigation, but then it's going to turn out that by allowing the investigation to happen, he's going to bring the real things to light, and then we'll see these tens of thousands of people being indicted and shipped off, and so on and so on and so on. Maybe at this point we should take a slight step back and say, where did all this come from in the first place?
4chan.
Well, obviously. Can you be a little more specific, or is that just enough?
Well, for some people that will be just enough, but for those of you who want to know more, basically this all started on 4chan in one of the political threads that they had there, where this person called Q, or QAnon, who claims to be a high-level government insider, started to post crucial intel drops onto 4chan. Now, who Q is, no one actually quite knows. Some people have thought that maybe the Q in QAnon, so anon just means anonymous in this particular respect. The Q could be a reference to Q from the Bond stories and films, or it could be a reference to the Q-level clearance at the Department of Energy, which is roughly comparable to United States Department of Defense top secret clearance with access to sensitive compartmentalized information. But whatever the case, Q or QAnon started regularly posting series of very cryptic tips on 4chan back in October of 2017.
And they were short on details, and often were...
To say they're short on details is to rather overstate the way that QAnon actually releases information. They don't really contain any details at all. They're more cryptic questions in which you're meant to fill in the blanks.
Yes. There's so little detail that you could probably, whatever anyone says about them, if it's what you wanted them to think, you could say, yes, that's exactly what I meant. And if it's not, no, you sort of misunderstood. But we have things like, just reading off our list here, HRC, which I assume is Hillary Rodham Clinton, HRC detained...
Or it could be the Human Rights Commission.
Well, even worse, because whoever they are, they detained, not arrested,
Yet.
Where is Huma? Follow Huma. I don't even know what Huma is. Do we know?
Former aide to Hillary Clinton.
Okay. This had nothing to do with Russia.
Yet.
Do you believe HRC Soros Obama? Was that a typo on your end or a typo on his
No,
end?
that's a typo on their end, or maybe
he's talking
something
about
that
Obama's
isn't
mother?
Obama. Yeah.
I don't know. Do you believe that those people, etc., have more power than Trump? Why did Soros donate all his money? Has George Soros donated all his money? Or did they just mean of all the money that he donated recently, why did he do it? Because he donates money quite a lot.
I'm assuming so. As far as I'm aware, George Soros is still very, very rich. No matter how much money he gives away, he still has a lot in reserve.
Yes. And then these little things, did it go to 4chan first, or were they tweets that got mirrored to 4chan? I'm not quite clear on that, Mark.
No, so these are basically things that appear in threads, which then get collated and then retweeted. So here's a fun little game. I'm going to give you a quatrain. So in many respects, basically what QAnon does is what Nostradamus does. Nostradamus is dead as far as I'm aware. Is Nostradamus dead yet? In that basically very vague things are said and you're meant to infer from what those things are exactly what the author is trying to get you to believe. So make of this what you will. Godfather 3, Alice and Wonderland. Alice, brackets, Lewis Carroll, close brackets, equal. The Bloody Wonderland, equal. Josh, what do you make of those clues? What does that make you think of?
A screenplay for a film that I'd quite like to watch, actually. Godfather 3 and Alice in Wonderland combined to become some sort of crossover fantasy mafia.
Basically they've actually given its name. The Bloody Wonderland equals box office success. All right,
in fact,
you solved that one. Try and solve this one. Clown agency greater than no such agency. Rip JFK, we will succeed. Pyramid will collapse. Think shall, or think shall, or think shall? I don't know how you mean. It's two words. I'm not quite sure how the enunciation is meant to work. But what do you make of that quatrain?
Well, I think any direction to think shall is obviously telling us that we should look to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in our hour of need. They will succeed where JFK failed. What was JFK trying to do? Bang lots of women? Just all the time?
Not die by assassination?
Well, yeah. So there we go. Pyramid will collapse. Possibly this is the pyramid of JFK's would-be paramours that he never managed to make his way through due to being assassinated. So I assume the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles
theory I want to hear more about.
Get together and have sex with all of JFK's ex-girlfriends, who are probably dead now as well. This has taken a turn for the worse. I think we should move on.
Now the thing I would know, now you have to link in clown agency being greater than no such agency.
Well, it's just mathematics. I mean, it's just obvious.
Fair enough.
I thought that was just
The point here is that you get these kind of quatrains or things like this being presented by QAnon on 4chan and then replicated or also put on Reddit, although the QAnon forums on Reddit have actually now been banned. And people pore over these to try and work out what they mean. And in fact, what you get is large numbers of Q documents. Now, Q documents in this particular case refer to people producing PDFs of everything that QAnon has produced in a calendar month and then trying to find connections between them. Now, anyone who knows anything about the hermeneutics of the Bible will also be aware that there's the infamous Q or Qella document, which is the collation of all the sayings and similarities in the four Gospels, trying to work out whether there's a source document that the Gospels were referring to, we might say an earlier Gospel, or set of letters or recorded sayings of Jesus Christ. So there's some interesting kind of hermeneutics here, which resembles the kind of trying to re-establish the Christ figure from the New Testament, but now being applied to Donald Trump, which is all just rather bizarre.
It is a little bit. So this QAnon guy, obviously he started showing up. I assume people paid attention to him to begin with because he was saying the sorts of things they'd like to hear. And then when he claimed to be that he was this this government insider, who I believe he claimed it was kind of his job to be disseminating information on 4chan in advance of this oncoming storm, which is an interesting way of getting stuff out there. But at one point he tweeted, I think, or posted somewhere a photograph of some islands which people claimed could be matched to photographs of these islands, seen from the air, I should say, which appeared to be islands that you would see if you were an aeroplane flying to Asia at the time when Trump was going on a trip to Asia. And so people took this to be proof that this guy was actually on Air Force One, and therefore his claims to being someone right in the inner circle of Trump's government must be legitimate. Apart from that, I haven't seen much in the way of what we might like to refer to as evidence. And in fact, there has been a lot of, every now and then he will say something concrete with a date in it. And these things which he claims are going to come to pass notably have not. As far as we know, for instance, John Podesta was supposedly going to be arrested on the 11th of March. We're recording this on the 12th of April, and there's been no news about Podesta being arrested. But maybe, just maybe, that's because he was arrested, but that itself was covered up. Have we actually, I feel like we've talked about this before, but I don't know if it was in an episode or just talking about this before an episode. But have we talked about the secret trials and the wrist monitors and the ankle monitors?
No, although I was going to say, because one of the other things that QAnon has claimed is that Barack Obama, John McCain, was there someone else who apparently have already been arrested, and they've now got ankle bracelets, which is apparently why we never see their legs. Because as you know, John McCain, prior to Trump's presidency, was always wearing jorts in the Senate, and Barack Obama was really, really fond of short shorts when he was president of the United States of America, always going to diplomatic functions in his short shorts. But now he always wears pants, which is proof positive he must be wearing an ankle bracelet. So yes, there's this notion that all the people that you want to be arrested have been secretly arrested, but the authorities haven't revealed that, so that the double bluff that Trump is doing to expose the Russians and their collusion can go ahead. I suppose it's in part the notion that if you make your enemies think that you're being investigated, your enemies will get sloppy, and then they'll let their guard down. But if you're going to do that, what you don't want is someone leaking information about this on 4chan. That just seems like a really, really weird way to get information out.
But then it does all get a bit Dan Brownish, doesn't it? Because obviously everything he said has been so cryptic, and for most, in most cases, non-specific, or talking about stuff that's going to happen in the future. In fact, there's even more to it. There's, I think Trump's going to establish some sort of martial law briefly while the military goes in and rounds up all these democratic collaborators, and we need to watch out because the Democrats will be on to them at that point, and so they're going to be staging fake riots and protests to try and distract from this or cover it up or oppose them in some way. It's quite a large picture that he paints, but this is all stuff that's going to happen supposedly. And when, yes, as you say, when he talks about things that have happened, it's things that have happened secretly and are being kept secret for now, which is indistinguishable from them not having happened at all, I suppose. But yeah, he's putting all the stuff on 4chan so that the people who really know what's going on, so that the insiders, the ones who are clever and in touch and can decipher all these things exactly like Tom Hanks in the Da Vinci Code and others, will be able to pour through.
You mean esteemed Harvard symbologist Robert Langdon as kind of boredly played by Tom Hanks in a series of increasingly terrible Ron Howard films, which is the reason why Solo, a Star Wars story, is filling me with dread, because Ron Howard is a very, very boring director. But that's an aside.
It is quite an aside. I can't even think. What films has he done? He's done the Dan Brown ones. He did Apollo 13. I don't know if I've ever seen a film directed by Ron Howard.
A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe as the mathematician?
No. If it doesn't have robots and explosions, I'm really not that interested, I have to be honest.
Well, but although Solo, a Star Wars story, is going to feature robots and explosions.
Exactly. So maybe that'll be my first taste of Ron Howard, so to speak. But anyway, not talking about Ron Howard, we're talking about Dan Brown novels, which Ron Howard has adapted. But again, that's not the point. The point is that the sorts of things we see in the Dan Brown type symbology, people who are the real clever ones, the ones who really get it all, can trawl through this stuff and find out the truth, whereas those dumb old Democrats who are busy being set up and put in sting operations and all this won't be able to figure it out. Yeah, it's
what I would like to think of as a special species of the whole elite conspiracy theory stuff, in that David Icke in particular is of the firm belief that the secret elites who actually control our society from behind the scenes kind of can't help themselves, in that they leak or encode information about their plots in the world around us, in part because they want to show us that they are in control, but also in part because they just can't help themselves. They have to boast about these things. And this is kind of an interesting version of that, where the conspiracy is everything is going to be all right. You might think Donald Trump is an aberration, but actually he's not an aberration. He's simply acting like an aberration in order to flush out the true aberrant members of our society. And what I find fascinating about this is that the people who are proposing this or believing this never seem to hold the same views about Barack Obama, and that they thought Barack Obama was the devil and a terrible person, but at no point did they go, oh, he's probably just putting on an act so that he can expose the true corruption in the system. This might be an example of what psychologists call motivated reason, a way of going, oh, I've got this really weird belief. I need to find some kind of motivation to make this belief cohere with my other beliefs. Oh, it's all right. Trump isn't bad. Trump is simply pretending to be bad to get at the real secret bad people operating behind the scenes.
Now, actually, and here's another thing that's slightly confusing to me. We've mentioned the deep state. It's a little bit unclear if the deep state are the good guys or the bad guys in this one. Is Trump staging some sort of counter coup to the deep state working things out, or are Russia the bad guys and the deep state are the good guys who Trump is working for? I've kind of seen both mixed in there.
And that's because Americans in particular are very confused as to what the deep state was. So there was a poll, I think about 2 months ago now, which polled American attitudes towards deep state conspiracy theories. And it turned out that 60% of the population believe that there is a deep state and the deep state is doing things behind the scenes. But also it turned out that once you started to get people to define what the deep state was, people would define the deep state as basically anything. So the deep state was the military-industrial complex. The deep state was the executive branch of the government. The deep state was the shadow government being set up by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Trump is a member of the deep state. Putin is a member of the deep state. It turns out that the deep state is simply a coded word that refers to anything you want it to. And so, yes, it is possible in some versions of this theory to say, look, the deep state is the Democrats and the Russians colluding together to destroy American values. But another version of the hypothesis is that Donald Trump is a member of the deep state, and the deep state are engaging in a large-scale conspiracy to flush out the true enemies of the American Republic. The deep state is everywhere, Joshua. Did you know you're a member of the deep state?
Can't say I'm surprised.
I'm not surprised at all. I mean, I've got your membership card right here. You joined in June of last year, and you still owe me the membership monies.
Well, that's too bad. I'll give you the membership monies once the glorious counter-revolution comes and we've all been rounded up into the Guantanamo Bay pens and are sharing a bunk with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. That's
going to be a fun sitcom, that one.
I would watch that.
Right, you're going to be in it. You've just admitted you're going to be in it. You're going to be rounded up into that particular bunk room.
But I assume once they make it, it would then broadcast on national television, and I'd be able to watch it. I'd happily.
It seems a bit self-serving to watch a sitcom you're starring in. I mean, what kind of egomaniac are you?
The very best kind.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yes. So I think we've come to the end. It's as conspiracies go, it's one of the messier ones. It's very much the sort of conspiracy theory I think that you would only believe in if you were already predisposed to believe it. I can't see it converting many people, but there are enough people who are taking it seriously, at least, that, as you say, 4chan, they actually killed the QAnon.
No, so I'm not quite sure about the 4chan threads. The Reddit threads basically have been shut down.
I think, was that in response to the Pizzagate dude taking a gun into the place, or was it just something that they saw it develop?
It was actually in response to Reddit deciding to clean up their act. So the poll space on Reddit basically was hosting a very large amount of neo-Nazi material, and Reddit were going, we're not comfortable with this. And so they closed those down, which as a private organization, they are entitled to say, we can decide how this space gets used, but has led to a lot of consternation by people going, well, if private corporations aren't going to support free speech, then that's a little bit of a worry. But that the conspiracy against free speech is a matter for another time.
It is, and it's not another time, it's this time. And we've talked about the storm. I think the only thing I've seen so far that the storm doesn't cover is Stormy Daniels, ironically. Although I suppose it would be very easy to sort of draw her in as yet another one of these attempts by the evil deep state Democrat child molesting pedophiles, slave traders, to try and discredit Trump. I've
to dis-Trump Trump. Although, of course, conversely, she could also be part of the conspiracy by providing an easy distraction for people to focus on so that Trump can get to the business of doing his uncovering the collusion in the background. What better to hide your real work than to provide the public with a spectacle? It's bread and circuses, Joshua. Bread and circuses.
Okay.
And Trump is Caesar, which means that the Ides of March is coming. This is a very bad analogy.
Because it's April. Well, I can think now is the concept of discrumping, which is presumably crumping in like the exact opposite harmony of another person who's crumping, so that you somehow cancel each other out in a blur.
So it's the sine wave and the anti-sine wave of crumping.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Do people still crump? That's a word I know, and I'm not cool, so I assume crumping isn't cool anymore.
The last time I saw some crumping was on the Mighty Boosh, and that ended... Well, you say crimping, I say crumping.
Yes. Anyway,
let's call the whole thing off.
Yes, I think the moral to this episode, as the moral to every episode, is that I'm old and not cool anymore. And to be honest,
it's true. You are very old and not cool at all. Well, I am, of course, am a paragon of youth, but also not cool.
You are remarkably fresh-faced, I have to say.
That's because I use baby fat on my face every day, as Julian Sands from Warlock recommends.
Right. I was assuming there must be a portrait somewhere of you that's in quite a state, but yeah, no baby.
Actually, I do have a portrait in the attic, but it's of 4 dogs playing poker, and yes, it's quite dilapidated.
So what you're saying is you are secretly 4 dogs playing poker? But
In a coat.
The more human you become, the more 4 dogsy Oscar Wilde was on drugs.
Good
That's all I have
drugs.
to say. Now, yes, old and uncool I may be, but I'm also Josh Addison of the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. I'm in Auckland in New Zealand, where the weather is turning cold and blustery. I'm on Twitter also at the same time, magically somehow, where I have the username Monkey Fluids, and if you wanted to get in touch with me, you could chuck me a message there, or using the email address, which I believe still goes over the end of each and every single one of these episodes. How about you?
Which means that we don't foul it up by trying to remember it ourselves. So yes, I'm M, or MRX Dentith. You can find me on the internet with the Twitter handle Conspiracism, and my blog is at episto.org, where you'll mostly find copies of this podcast, but also updates on articles and books that I'm involved in. And that's basically it for me. And I think that was basically it for you.
I think it was. For us, we should probably say that the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy is on iTunes and on Stitcher and on a few other places, and at conspiracism.podbean.com, which is the site where it's officially hosted, where you can find links to our various patronage campaigns if you feel like chucking us a couple of bucks. I think I've got the video recording licked. Finally, I managed to put together a video for the last episode, so hopefully it will work as well again this time. And you could even go on YouTube and watch us with your actual eye business, or you could just listen to it as a podcast. I understand that is what the kids do, isn't it? When
they're out jogging or running
not
or
owning houses.
Yeah,
It's
true.
And I believe that's everything. So, until next time, goodbye.
Yes. I shall also shrug my soldiers and go, shrug my soldiers? Yes, I've got some soldiers which soldiers. They're shrugging, and I'm going to shrug with them and go, goodbye?
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, hosted by Josh Addison and M. Dentith. If you'd like to help support us, please find details of our pledge drive at either Patreon or Podbean. If you'd like to get in contact with us, email us at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com.